Being generous is part of our fundamental values in the studio, and by sharing it, we believe that somebody comes back to us with a different level of knowledge that we can put in. Every time we start something, the first thing we say is like, can we scale it? If it can't be scaled, forget it. It doesn't really matter, because it's in the scaling we do the difference.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Bana, host of today's HubTalks conversation with Louis Becker. Louis Becker is Global Design Director at Henning Larsen, the architecture, landscape, and urbanism firm founded in 1959. Louis, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting.
Yeah. You first joined Henning Larsen Architects in 1989, and you've seen the company evolve to over 650 employees now, yeah? And multiple offices, including a new one in Australia, as well as projects in 20 countries. How has the company evolved since you first joined?
Well, we were a small, quite famous office, at least in Denmark. And Henning Larsen had done the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Saudi Arabia, been going up to like 80 people. But when I joined, we were 23 people. We did some nice projects, but we had a problem of not winning. And we had to really work on kind of getting onto winning track. And that took a couple of years before we got a good team going, and Henning, of course, was very persistent on getting us there. And then we start really winning projects. So we grew from 23 to 80 to 90 to 100 quite fast. And then it's been steady until 2000, where we did another jump, starting to be more international, again going out traveling, and started in the Middle East. We had something in Norway, but the Middle East was the big thing. And because the projects are so big in Middle East, that really makes a growth in what you do.
The title of today's conversation is Readiness for Change, a reference to your exhibition, Changing Our Footprint, first presented in Berlin and Hamburg, and then here in Copenhagen at the Danish Architecture Center. There's the famous statistics that the construction industry is responsible for at least 40% of emissions around the world, which is a significant amount. Can you give an overview of why you came up with the idea of the exhibition and the concepts behind it?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a story to it, because this journey started more than 15 years ago, which was about looking into how do we bring more knowledge and like sustainable thinking into the projects we were doing. And as architects, you have a certain kind of training, and of course you're not a scientist and you're not an engineer. So what we did was we started a PhD program with industrial PhDs, and that meant we suddenly had young engineers, we had scientists working in the studio, and that became a game changer for all of what we have done since, because it's a way of thinking a project, starting the project. And changing our footprint is about, let's say, summing up some of the knowledge we have gained over the years into an exhibition. And what we try to do is to simply identify the carbon footprint or the impact on environment in each of the materials we are using. So we are having a kind of a material box where we learn a kind of carbon learning tool that we're also traveling with for free, giving lectures and also training to municipalities and colleagues and cities and different places.
One of the projects that you bring up in the exhibition is a cultural institute built in Roskilde in 2014, I think. You say that if we were to build that now, we wouldn't do it in the same way because it's entirely in concrete, a lot of concrete.
Yeah.
That was only 10 years ago, though.
Yeah, things are changing fast. You can say 10 years ago, concrete was still considered as being rather sustainable in many ways. But of course, with the knowledge we are gaining, we could see that that was not a way to go. And yes, we would not do it like that today. As an example, I can say that 10 years ago, we did maybe 1,000 square meters total of our vast production in wood. Now we are on the other side of 400,000 square meters in wood constructions globally. Yeah.
Wood is one of the 4 materials that you present in the exhibition. You have 4 biogenic materials: wood, eelgrass, mycelium, and straw. Which of these 4 materials do you think has most promising potential to be more mainstream? I know wood already is, but what about the other 3?
What we've seen is that the straw seems to be a very strong product to work with, because if you build your walls from straw, now we're working with Eco Cocoon, the company that are producing, you get a really low carbon building module you can work with. And the thing, if you work with it in modules, you can also control it, and you can, let's say, put it into the industry the way you work today. If you didn't have the modules, you would have to do it handcrafted, and then the cost of doing it would just kill it immediately. So I think the straws is the biggest one. Mycelium is coming. There's so many amazing possibilities with mycelium, and also some pitfalls that we have to be sure of that works. And if you know that every time you do something, there's kind of a plus and a minus kind of attached to it. It's like, what is the surplus and what is the difficult things? And you have to somehow, before you put it into a building, to test that first. But in mycelium, most of the products you see are what you call stabilized in the mycelium world. What you do is that you kind of warm it, and everything is killed and nothing comes out. I mean, it doesn't give any gases or anything like that. What we are exploring, and I think hopefully you'll come back to that, talk about the Milan project, is that we're testing to keep them alive, to not kill the things. And we also talk about with wood. All the wood you see here, of course, is kind of killed. We cut it out of the tree. It's here and it's been here for many, many years. But what if we somehow kept it alive? What would happen to the materials?
Do you feel like there's a lot of work convincing clients with materials like mycelium?
Yes.
Because it is, I mean, I don't know what the scientific word would be, but it is a form of mold.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive to work with it inside a building where we've been trained to really avoid anything like that.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting it there somehow. And also to understand, when you work on these research-based projects, which is typically smaller projects, the risk-taking and the appetite from the clients are much bigger than the big ones. So you have to somehow convince with the smaller project clients for the bigger projects. And with the straw, there's an example. We did an almost pro bono project for an extension of a small school in Jutland, 250 square meters, which was one classroom and an extra social space. And we built the whole thing with straw, and we had to also constructed ourselves, most of it together with EcoCocoon. And now it was very successful, and it works, and very good indoor climate and stuff. And with that project, we convinced a very big client for a very big project in Holland. And now we have one building, which is a logistic building under construction, which is 166,000 square meters with straw facades and the whole built up in straw. I think this is also important when we do these things. We have to be patient and allow this to happen in a process. We cannot just come with, the shining star and bring it in and then everybody wants to do it.
You did say that there is so much to learn and so much to unlearn. What are some of the unlearnings that we need to do?
Well, first, the unlearning in this is that basically if you have a foundation, you have to be casted. For now, that is the biggest threat we have. If we keep on doing the concrete foundations, we will never reach this very low carbon target we have, because you need to allow a certain element of aluminium or other kind of materials in it, which is not super positive. Or even if you have a parking garage or basement, it's almost impossible to reach the level of the 5 or 7 kilos per square meter per year.
There was one project here in Denmark, almost entirely carbon sequestering. So there are models.
Yes, that's just different ways. We are working also with the concrete. It's not like we hate concrete. We're working with it. We try to be part of developing low carbon concrete. To get it totally out of the carbon is a little bit optimistic, but you can really get to very little. And that, of course, helps a lot.
How do you navigate client hesitation overall?
I think it's easier to talk to a client when you have a backlog, as we have with projects the size we've done. And you can go to a lot of construction sites. We have really skillful teams. We can bring the new client together with an existing client and talk about what was the experience. Basically, we are vouching for the solutions or the design we are doing also technically. And that is the curse and the beauty of being a big studio.
Absolutely. Do you feel like clients in Denmark are more welcoming to different materials as opposed to the rest of the world? Or
the Nordics are much easier to convince people to do it. I think the big change here was when the pension funds started to put it up as part of their strategy to build low carbon buildings. Mm-hmm. That was really the game changer of the industry, because it's almost public money. It's really long term, and they have a very strong-hearted ambition in doing that, and that makes the whole industry kind of turning into it. And now we are seeing private developers following it, because it's also a price tag thing. We have a construction site just around here. If you saw a very big tent, in that tent we are doing a wood structure. Everything is in wood with less than 5 kilos per square meter per year. And these apartments are sold individually to end users, and we're looking at prices of 100,000 kroner a square meter. And a lot of the reasons why they pay so much is because it's so sustainable, and they believe that in the future that's holding the value.
definitely a lot of work with wood. About the timber industry, I know you have a publication focused entirely on woods, and you mentioned that there's a lot of timber supply, but not enough demand. What do you think is blocking timber from becoming more commonly used?
I think one of the biggest things we have is the fire regulations, because fire is not a precise scientific thing. It's also about what that local fire brigade manager kind of feels is the right thing to do, because they feel a personal or have a personal responsibility for the fire. So what we're seeing at the moment is that we are getting to have exposed wood in the multi-story apartment buildings. And before that, you could do 2 stories and that was it. We've been working on 100-meter towers also with wood. But it's the fire that all the time is the difficult one. And of course, it have to work. It's safety. It's about people. But there's many ways to get there. You don't need to put dry walls or gypsumite boards on all the wood. That you can salt it. You can also dimension yourself out of it. So what you do is that instead of having a column that is 45 centimeters by 45 centimeters, it's 60 by 60, because that gives you the time, the 60 minutes you need for the fire resistance. And we're doing just again around the corner, a big office building where we did that. So each of the columns are 60 by 60, and that means that we can expose the wood. So there's ways of getting there, but fire is the biggest thing. And then I would also say, yes, we have supplies of wood. It's not the same quality everywhere, but we have a lack of skilled labor force builders that can work with wood, which is also part of it. And that drives the prices up. So when you look at and trying to do a value engineering, where are we with the money? Then of course, if there's nobody who can do it, then the few that can make it ups the price. And that sometimes will be the end of the wood in that project.
I believe you also use wood in the church that just opened here in Copenhagen. Is it Oderstad, the neighborhood?
Yeah, this is not open. It's just breaking ground the other day. That one, but we opened another church in Skanderborg in Jutland. Yeah.
So you have 2 churches that just opened. One that is the first in the region in 500 years or something, and one in Copenhagen that's first to open in Copenhagen in 50 years.
But that's because there's a rule: if a new neighborhood is established and a certain amount of people lives there, you're fundamentally right to have a church.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your approach for these 2 churches? I'm sure everyone here is curious to hear about the Copenhagen one specifically.
But churches are very particular to do. It's on one hand the most simple building to do, and it's at the same time the most difficult building to do as a designer, because it's not just about walls and materials and logistics and all that, and it's not about just light. It's about a certain atmosphere of being able to sink in. You're together as a group, but you're also individually part of meeting your God or whatever it is you're meeting inside. So you have to create a really particular atmosphere. And what we've learned, we've done some other churches before, is that if you work with the daylight in it, and because services happen at daylight, and what you see is that the change of the light over this 1 hour or 1.5 hours that the service happening is really part of making things progressing and happening. So if you can somehow play with that, then you get a kind of really special place that you remember. You never confuse it with being an office building, or I'm at work, or I'm in a bar and I have fun. It's something different. And it's about that you're secluded from the world outside. At the same time, it's to massage your kind of inner thinking or beliefs out in a very safe place. That's also a part of it. So churches are like extremely difficult. When we do hundreds of models with the light, with the materials, with the flooring, with the chairs, and churches you often do all the furniture as well.
Yeah,
so
we were just talking about the chair that you are showcasing here during 3 days of design.
It's in the city now. There's 100 chairs exhibited.
Yeah. I find it interesting to see the church with horizontal massing as opposed to the vertical that we're used to, the monumental. I do think it's fascinating to be designing churches in contemporary times.
It's somehow to kind of play a bit with the centrality of the church, which is the normal one, but swiping it out and have a different approach to it. And you can also say when you're doing a church in Copenhagen in reference to do a church in Jutland, provincial city, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Different ways of thinking it. Different people, different things. You have to accommodate a different audience.
Absolutely. Are there any other upcoming projects here in Copenhagen that you're excited about?
Well, I would say the big office project, when it finishes, I'd love to see that start to come in function and see how people work in it. We do a post-occupancy test of bigger buildings always in the studio. So we get results back. We did a business school in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we had a guy living there for 6-7 months to see how the students used the facility to be sure that what we thought was what happened. And it's documented and it's written and all that afterwards. And that becomes part of the way we start a new project later on.
Mm-hmm. Do you often go back to the projects that you complete years later?
It depends a little bit. Some projects you do. There's always some projects in your production, in your work that is kind of with you all the time. And there's projects that are a little more like an everyday experience. And the projects that keeps on coming back to you is because there was a very intense design process in it where you were like doubtful and tested and came back and maybe fought a bit with the client to convince them. And these projects you often have a tendency to naturally go and see again because like, okay, they all come back to you as soon as you're in the space. It's like, God, this was this discussion. That was what we did here. Or this was a technical obstacle and we solved it somehow. But and that is important. I think in architecture and design, you have somehow to love it and be able to come back to it. Otherwise, it's a bit strange. It's not a mechanical or like commercial production in that way.
Absolutely. And there are many tools that are popping up about building performance. I don't know if you use any metrics from any sort of tools to use performance from old buildings for new ones.
There is a lot of measuring in the buildings, both old and new. And today you work with apps that also give the users a possibility to come with input. We just worked on a big project in Toronto, Canada, where we developed an app where you can, as a user, say, I want a coffee at 11 o'clock. And then it tells you where in the project you can sit outside, where there's wind shaded, where the sun is hitting and stuff like that. But you also look at your parking and dry cleaning and stuff like that. But having that means that you suddenly gain a lot of data. You get a kind of a user. How do people use the buildings?
Yeah.
We're looking forward to see that coming back to us.
So you have a lot of offices around the world. I mentioned Australia earlier that you just opened about 2 months ago. And then you have an office in the US and an office in Oslo. Do you feel like you receive insights from them, or is the knowledge production Copenhagen-led?
I think maybe this comes from Scandinavia, Danish architecture kind of thinking, is that every time you go to a place, you try to meet the culture at eye level and talk to them and discuss and learn something from it before you start designing. We're trying in our design process, which we have done, I wouldn't say to perfection, but we really worked on the design method, really to be able to listen before we start designing. And if you think about a US office, the one we have in New York, it's a completely different agenda you are working with, and the whole initiating the belief in the public space is part of it. That what is not have a direct ownership. How do you work with that? That's in many places, but US is absolutely one of them. Australia is completely different. It's much more a place where you're testing things and what can it be, and we are part of it. I think culturally it goes all the way back to when Australia was established as a colony from UK. That is still really part of the thinking. So we take learnings from all our places. We do a lot of the design in Copenhagen, but we have some design studios, which is not Copenhagen. We have Australia, Singapore, New York, Munich. That's where we design. And then we have smaller studios where it's more about we have some projects and we have to be close to the client and stuff like that.
You're also known for your collective vision, your tendency to hire people from a lot of different disciplines. You have anthropologists, computational engineers, designers. Why do you find that very important as a value, as an approach?
Well, first of all, some of this goes all the way back to Henning Larsen. He was a very curious person and a professor in the US and different places. And he was a true believer of learning from different cultures. So when I started my first trip to Middle East, he came with a big old book about the countries, the families of the region and all that. You had to read that. But if you look at the studio, this is how you bring people in and you're curious and listen to them and figure out what they're doing. So that's the one part, and that we do that with architects. We are like 35 nationalities in Copenhagen alone. But looking at the other part, which is bringing a different professional perspective from engineers, social science, and all of that. That is also to broaden the perspective of what we're doing. And that is a big thing. At the moment, we have 22 full-time researchers hired. Wow. We're doing all kinds of different projects. Like, giving example, we finished a year ago a long test with the impact of artificial light and noise in kindergartens. It's a little bit nerdy, but those of you who have kids, you come to the kindergarten with your kid, and the noise are unbearable. and you think like, how can my poor kid live in here? But they start screaming as much as the other ones, so the whole thing is really alive. And we didn't understand that. We've done quite a few of these facilities, schools and kindergartens, facilities for younger people. And what we looked at here was to figure out how can we bring down the noise. And one thing we found out, and especially we have this long dark winters here, that when you put the common light, which is the 300 lux, which is what you need to clean the floor, then the kids, they try to speak up the whole space. We didn't know that. We worked with doctors as well. So what we did was we put in chicken heaters, which is these ones, if you have chickens, you have like some really warm light, and they sit under these warm lamps because it's nice. We put them in and with small, very low tables, and the kids was kind of gathering around that. And we could take out 8 to 12 decibel immediately. Then we started covering the normal lighting that sits in the ceiling and shifted that. And we had a test with daylight and stuff like that. And that understanding of what light means for acoustic situation is something we now brought into schools and universities as well. But that's a long thing you have to do with PhD programs in between Germany and Denmark. But the knowledge is good.
Yeah. One thing that I find very interesting about Henning Larsen Architects is your tendency to produce and to share knowledge. I think other than the exhibition that we were just discussing, Changing Our Footprints, you also had Growing Matters in Milan, and you also had a few publications. You also have this program of Unboxing Carbon, another publication on wood. It's just a lot of open source information.
Yeah.
Who are you creating these exhibitions, these workshops, these publications for? Who is the target audience?
First of all, we believe that you can't hold on to the knowledge privately anyhow, so it doesn't really mean anything. And being generous is part of our fundamental values in the studio, and by sharing it, we believe that somebody comes back to us with a different level of knowledge that we can put in. But at the same time, this is also part of the market situation for us, because there's really clients out there that likes this idea that it's open source and it's generous and you share. So my friends become your friends and stuff like that. This is an important thing.
It's also, an invite for other firms to play part as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we have all these collaboration with smaller producers of new materials, mycelium or composite materials and stuff like that, with low carbon. That comes from that.
Yeah. What kind of allies do you think the architecture industry needs right now to move forward, to hit the 2030 targets, to move forward?
Well, first of all, as I tried to say before, I think it's important that when we take these steps, we take the baby steps first before we try to do them in big scale. Because if we try to learn from history, what happens when we had the building boom in the 60s and 70s was that there was no baby steps. It was just doing it. And we have had issues ever since globally with that. PFAS is one of them, the sealing material you use around windows and stuff like that. It's everywhere because it kind of contaminates the stones, whatever it sits in. The concrete concrete buildings were done big issues with that as well. Some of it was poorly insulated. So I think if we want to make something that works for a long time perspective, we need, as architects and designers and also clients, to work with small projects that can be turned into big projects. So we look, every time we start something, the first thing we say is like, can we scale it? If this works as we think it would or hope it would, can it be scaled? If it can't be scaled, forget it. It doesn't really matter, because it's in the scaling we do the difference. So that's, to me, the targets that are coming against us as a freight train, is to really be sure that what we do works and can be scaled.
Absolutely.
I remember when I started in 89, we were doing a hotel in Cambridge in the UK, and the client at the time, he was obsessed with the price of the small wood panel that meets where the floor meets the wall. So he was trying to figure out, can we do a plastic version? Can we do a soft one we just glue on? And at the end, Henning came in and said, sorry, we cannot work with you anymore. It's not how we do projects. If that's what you put all your effort and energy in, then we out and we skip the project. And I was like thinking, my God, we have no work. And we all got sacked, but rehired again. But yeah.
Yeah. As we wrap up today's conversation, is there any projects or anything upcoming that you're particularly excited about that you'd like to share with the audience?
The other project I'm quite curious to see coming out is that we won a master plan 7 years ago now in Toronto, outside Toronto, which is a 6 million square meter build up, which is of course extremely big, and it takes 35 years to make it happen. But in that one, we have just won one of the neighborhoods. So we did the big plan, worked on it for a long time, and now we're going to do a neighborhood. I think there's something about working with projects in the scale where it's not just one building, but a set of buildings that creates outdoor space and public realm that together makes the place. This is on another side of materials and ambience and feeling and what is the texture. It's that we all the time look at how does the project we do interact, make betterments for a city, for a place, for a neighborhood. And that's why coming back to these places and just, rediscover the proportions, even though you know them because you've worked on it as designer, just to see it happens that's why it's the best in the world to be an architect. Yeah. That's because you have this chance.
I kind of wish I was an architect now.
Well, always have a chance.
Alrighty. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I hope you all have a great 3 days of design, and thank you again.